Pleasure to welcome to the podcast. It's Emily Perrin, former D1 not goalie, but a soccer player, and a coach yourself. Emily, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Excited to be here. Yeah, I do get mistaken for a goalie a lot because I'm tall, but definitely was not a goalie.
What position did you play?
I was a striker.
You're a striker, the goal scorer. All right,
Yeah,
the exact opposite of a
yeah.
goalie. Well, the main thing that you do that I didn't mention, the reason I wanted to get you on this podcast is you do mindfulness. You've been doing that for a while. I'd love to hear quickly, how you your background, how you got into that, and what you got going on these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So, really, how did I get into this? Well, I am a coach's daughter. So my dad actually coached basketball at the University of Virginia for close to 15 years. So that was the first 10 years of my life. I knew nothing else. Twofold, he also has a PhD in sports psychology. So from a really young age, I saw this kind of other side to the game, whether he was, talking to players on the phone at home, whether they were coming over to our house, right? Whether he was meeting with players. Like, I knew that there was sport, right? But I also knew that there was this added piece of the mental side of things, right? So I was exposed to that pretty early. Played soccer at UVA, went straight into coaching, really knew I wanted to coach. So I spent 3 years as an assistant at Penn. I also did a ton of stuff at the youth level. It was really at Penn, the Ivy League and UVA is a phenomenal school. It's very challenging, but the Ivy League is a beast of its own. Being a Division I athlete at an Ivy League school is no joke. And it was really there when I was coaching. I just, my role as kind of that second assistant was, helping our girls, our kids with a lot of just like the more day-to-day stuff. It was just really apparent to me that, athletes are really struggling. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of expectation. And it's not that I didn't feel that as an athlete, I did, but I think being in a different role really exposed me to then the lack of resources. Because, I was just having this conversation with somebody that is around my age. So, we have to think we were in college playing sport 10 years ago, about a decade ago.
Yeah.
And you don't know what you don't know, right? Like for us in college, not having mental health resources, right? Mindfulness, performance, like we didn't know. It didn't really exist, right? So it wasn't, I think as I stepped into coaching, it was very apparent that like, man, we're now moving in a time where like kids are really suffering and we don't have help, right? We don't have adequate resources, the structure in place. And so that's when I was really like, man, I want to work in sport. I want to work with athletes, but I don't think it's actually like the traditional coaching, the X's and O's of soccer. Twofold, I'm really honest about my own kind of mental health journey. I've ever since a really young age struggled with kind of chronic anxiety and panic attacks, panic disorder. And so I kind of left coaching and, it was kind of like, it was either, you could either, I guess, consider it as like the perfect storm or like kind of the perfect situation that allowed me to kind of hit rock bottom with my own mental health, but also be in a position to really change and pivot my career. And so, as I was kind of working with my own anxiety, I got really into yoga. I hit a yoga mat every single day. I got into breath work. I got into mindfulness and meditation, and I'm a pretty curious creature. I think that comes from my dad. Like he's kind of always has a book in his hand. He's always giving me a book. Like we're always talking about things, talking shop. And I ordered a pretty like famous book. If anybody follows mindfulness, Jon Kabat-Zinn is a huge name in mindfulness. It's called Wherever You Go, There You Are. And I really just like, there was something that really resonated with me about it. And I noticed very quickly within about like 2 to 3 months of like really committing to a mindfulness practice. And there's so many, we can get into this, but so many ways to practice mindfulness. I really noticed a difference in my own mental health and my well-being. And that was it. I was like, man, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to give back to athletes. This is how I want to work with athletes. So that really launched me into going back to school. I became a mental health therapist. I studied mindfulness meditation with a former Buddhist monk for about almost a year. He does some stuff with the Golden State Warriors. And if anybody follows the NBA, the Golden State Warriors, like mindfulness is actually a pillar of their team. And so I got really interested in like, okay, how do we take this concept, mindfulness, 2,500-year-old concept, right? It's been around forever, but like really make it relatable and accessible to the 21st century athlete. And so, yeah, that's where I landed. And here I am almost 5 years later and loving life.
Well, that's awesome. And you worked, with a bunch of athletes, but also specifically with lacrosse. I mean, you sent over your resume and you've worked with the Penn team, you've worked with the Michigan team, you got the Michigan colors, the Duke team, the US lacrosse youth team. I know I've seen your videos with Jules Henneberg. It's awesome stuff. So you are very well merged into the lacrosse scene. And this is great. This is great. Yeah. Well, and here we are talking on a lacrosse goalie podcast. One thing that you mentioned that really resonated with me is we are now in a time where, like, there's so much anxiety and there's so many mental health problems. And I think a lot of that is triggered by the social media. Like, I know when I was in high school, like there was no, I'm 42, right? So I graduated in 99. And there was like, we didn't have cell phones or internet, or you didn't know what was going on in the world. And that brought us sort of a certain amount of peace. And so there's that interesting, juxtaposition of like so much mental health problems and then like no solutions, or even like in certain cases, a stigma to talk about it, to say like, I need to take some time off because I'm not right mentally. Right. Like, that really resonated with me. And so I'm happy we're chatting about this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, oh my gosh, social media, man. It's I have to laugh because it's a catch-22, right? Like it is incredible in so many ways. And I will say, like, I mean, that's how we connected, right? And that's the cool thing about it.
Right.
And I will say, like, 85% of my business, right? My work comes from someone seeing a clip or something, right? And it's great. Like that's amazing. It's an amazing way to spread good information. But I was also having a conversation with a friend of mine. She's a dietitian in the sports space, and she was saying there's just enough information to be really dangerous. And I think that's true, and the fact that, it's literally phones, social media, they're designed to really keep us cued in, right? There's an addictive piece to it. And so, that absolutely is impacting mental health.
Yeah, 100%. All right. So let's talk about mindfulness. If I'm a goalie out there listening to this, or even better yet, I'm a goalie dad, goalie mom, right? And I hear this word mindfulness, and I don't know what it is, but I hear Emily goes, "Hey, this could really help you. It really helped me." Talk to me about, what it is, and then like, how could I maybe implement it, or what kind of benefits would I expect?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, mindfulness, and I always like tell all my athletes, like, just, you can Google it. And the most common definition that is going to come up, right, comes from John Kabat-Zinn, who is, he's really kind of the father of this program, mindfulness-based stress reduction. It is, we are paying attention, and most people, most athletes, whether college or high school, can get that part, right? And simple example, right? If I were to ask you to, like, hey, just like bend over and mindfully tie your shoe, right? Most people would be like, oh, okay, that's going to cue me to like really actually focus and pay attention to what I'm doing. 100%, right? But we're doing it in a really particular way. So we're paying attention. We have this like intentionality and this focus to it, but we're doing it without judgment. And so it's not just being present and focusing. It is doing that with a certain attitude that is a little bit more balanced. And what that enables us to do is gain a perspective and awareness that is actually pretty counterintuitive to how we live our entire lives. We as humans, we're not very present. We operate a lot of our lives on autopilot. And what I mean by autopilot, right, is like we're just going through the motions. I mean, how many times, for those of us that drive, do you get in the car and you drive somewhere and you get to your destination and you're like, how did I get here? Right. It's not and I think there is a lot of sometimes, right, in the mental performance space, particularly, like we can villainize distraction and autopilot. And my whole thing is like, we don't need to villainize it. We don't need to make it a bad thing. Right. It actually is designed to help us and to actually reserve brain power, energy. It's actually a really cool thing. We just need to be able to work in and out of it, right? Teaching kids, athletes, right, how to move in and out of autopilot into presence and shift, right? And so, this skill can provide an athlete with so many benefits, right? Just in terms of actually being able to commit to the moment, right? We talk in sport all the time of like, be in the moment, be where your 2 feet are. I've worked a lot in baseball. That is a very common phrase in baseball because it's such a stagnant sport, right? Like, be where your 2 feet are. But like, there's actually a lot of complexity that goes into being present, because the human mind runs at 1,000 miles per hour. And so, that's aspect one, right? Helping athletes really understand what being present is. And the irony is that to play our sport well, we need to be present, right? Because if you're in the cage and your brain is not actually in the cage with you, chances are you're going to have a hard time stopping the shot, right? And so there's this present element, right? Being present, being where your 2 feet are. But I think there's, more broadly, right? It's a skill that is providing us with just a lot of personal awareness. I talk with a lot, especially like a lot of my college and pro guys, right? Like awareness and really tapping in and gaining insight into your own thinking, feeling, and doing or behavior is a really big deal, especially if you want to continue to grow and play at the next level. And so mindfulness is really a skill that allows us to gain more awareness about ourselves, about our lives, how we interact with people. And that's a really big deal for an athlete. The third piece that I'll touch on is the kind of the mind-body connection. We talk about that in sport a lot. I think it's also maybe even a misconception at times that like elite athletes, college athletes have a really in tune mind-body connection. And I actually find that that's not always the case. Like the mind-body connection is something that we can train, we can get better at, right? Whether it's interoceptive awareness, meaning like, how do I feel in my body? Exteroceptive awareness, relating to, right, external factors, the outside world. Those are really big things for an athlete. And so a skill that enables you to really fine tune that and really feel your body accurately is going to do wonders, right? In terms of, yes, performance and your movement, right? But also in how you take care of yourself. I mean, a big thing I do with athletes is really emphasize taking mindfulness and using it as a recovery tool. Because I'll tell you right now, right? The performance, the grind, the push, right? The ability to go is incredible. It's needed. But how you recover is probably even more important than that. And so mindfulness is something that really allows us to fine tune that kind of mind-body connection, continuously and accurately tune in, right, to how we're feeling. And then we can take care of ourselves. So I would say kind of those three, and there's more than that, but I'll leave it at those three, right? This ability to be present, the mind-body connection, and then awareness.
Okay. Let me see if I can get it. I'm going to try to repeat it back to you because that's a lot of good stuff, but let me see if I've got it. So, this mind-body awareness is that like this idea of like, I need to know like what's going on like in my body, right? Like, oh, today I'm feeling tired, right? And understanding that like, oh, I'm feeling tired, and then sort of using that information, but really like that ability to recognize that tired or I don't know what some other ones are. Maybe I'm feeling great, right? I'm feeling great. It could be the other spectrum on the other end of the spectrum. Is that kind of is that how I should think about the mind-body connection?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
And I'll take it even a step further, right? Because, the other piece of this, right, is, emotions and inner dialogue. I think something, and this is really big for, every athlete, but I think, goalies as well, just because of the nature of their sport, right? They're getting, pummeled with shots. So the inner dialogue, right? Everything that we're thinking is going to be producing something in the physical body. And even let's get back to anxiety, right? Anxiety is actually just a physiological reaction. And what I find often with a lot of my athletes is that they're actually experiencing anxiety within their body, right? They feel things in their body and they don't actually even know that it's anxiety. And so, that's a problem, right? That's not a problem, but I should say that's going to be a big piece of then how we navigate it, right?
Yeah.
So mind-body connection is 1000%, right? This piece of like, ooh, okay, like body feels tired or hamstring feels sore, right? Or,
Right.
okay, actually I feel pretty good. But it's even more layered than that, right? It's emotionally, right? It's what we're thinking, all of the above. But
Yeah.
yes,
Wow.
you were on the right path.
And that's very hard to do, right? Like at what you like I can't do that. Or at least like I probably can, but like it's gonna take some training, right? But can an 8-year-old do that? Can a 9-year-old do that? Like I like that. At what age should we start to incorporate this?
Yeah, I mean, so I wear two hats, right? So I have my own company doing mindfulness and performance coaching, and all of that is athlete work. But I also am a therapist, what we think of as just a traditional mental health therapist, and
Yeah.
I do work with kids. And I do. I mean, mindfulness is one of the first things that I'll teach a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old.
Right.
You have to change the language, right? Because they have to be able to. You have to teach it in kid language, right? 8-year-old language. But yeah, 100%. Is it going to be as deep and complex as, somebody that's playing in the PLL? No,
Mhm.
not
Right.
necessarily. But yeah, 100%. We can start teaching this. And, it is starting in many places to be taught in schools, elementary schools, middle
Oh wow.
schools. Because again, it gets back to, yes, the mind body piece, but just how we regulate emotions.
Yeah.
It is, and especially in, I've done some work in what we call partial hospitalization, which is very, we're dealing with very intense mental health issues that are very crippling. People are, often in and out of inpatient, right? So psychiatric facilities, getting help. And one of the first skills that we help them with, right, is mindfulness in some capacity, because it really does allow you tools and skills to be able to regulate your emotions, right? Whether you're swinging really high or really low. So,
Yeah.
for an athlete, that can be a really big deal.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up that emotional piece because, as lacrosse goalies, like the emotions run hot, especially if you're an emotional player like I was.
Mhm.
Um, and the goalie position is one where like your mistakes are on the board, right? If you, as a soccer striker, you miss like an open shot, like, yeah, you're going to feel bad, but like, it's not on the scoreboard, but like goalies often feel like they're letting the team down with each error that they make. And then even more in lacrosse, like, you sit with those emotions and those thoughts and the game's like still going, right? So a lot of times you're thinking like, dang, I should have had that last save. Here comes another one. You missed that one. Now the crowd's on you. And it's like, and all the wheels are coming off the wagon. So that's cool that, we can use mindfulness to help regulate that. And I know we're going to talk about some more about that in a second here. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. You touched on anxiety. Maybe it's a good segue to go to anxiety. Because specifically a lot of goalies, they feel pregame anxiety, right? What should I be looking for in my body to notice, what anxiety is and like how can I, what are some ways to deal with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Something I am obviously really passionate about because of my own journey with it.
Yeah.
I think the first, like before we even get into like the feeling and the sensation of it, like the first thing I want to, and I've been doing kind of a series on anxiety, but on my Instagram, and I posted this a few weeks ago. The first thing that I tell athletes, whether it's in a team setting or if I'm working with them individually, is like, anxiety is not bad. I
Right.
think many of us, right? We experience anxiety, even stress, right? Worry, nerves. And our first kind of initial reaction to it is it's bad. I don't like it. And especially for an athlete, I think there is, again, mostly because of mental health stigma, right? And also like a lot of the times when an athlete is nervous, think about it this way, and they go to a teammate or a parent or a coach or a friend and they say, "Oh, I'm nervous about the game." More often than not, the response they're getting from teammate, parent, coach, right, is, "Oh, don't be nervous.
Right.
You got this. Nothing, you don't need to be nervous. There's nothing to be nervous about." And that's actually, I think that has created this cycle of invalidation, right?
Yeah.
Because the reality is at that moment, the athlete is nervous. That's valid. Point, period, right? Like they are nervous, right? So you telling them not to be how they're feeling is not helpful at all,
Mm.
right? And so then what the athlete often feels is shame. I'm wrong, right? Oh, I shouldn't be nervous. And so then, right, again, they're not only nervous now, but then they're beating themselves up because they're nervous, right? Because there's this message that, oh, you should be walking into games confident and calm, cool, and collected. And no, even the best players, the best players that I work with in the PLL, they get nervous before they play. It's actually a really natural, normal human thing, right? And I take it one step further and say, it's never going to go away, right? As long as we're living till the day we die, we as humans are going to experience anxiety. So the more that you start to actually change your relationship to it, the better. Okay. So it's not bad. It's not going to go away. Can we navigate it in more efficient ways? 100%. Okay. So let's get into what you asked, which is like, well, how do I know? Well, the first thing that many people will start to feel, right, is, and if you're watching this podcast or listening, like, think about this, like, when I get kind of nervous about something, like, where do I generally feel it? A lot of people will feel butterflies in their chest or their stomach. Some people might feel actually queasy or sick to their stomach. Some people feel shaky, jittery, right? Like they almost have ants in their pants, like they can't sit still. Some of it is people could get hot. So like the actual like body temp, right, gets hot. Palms can get sweaty. Palms could also get clammy. And a lot of people will get anxious and kind of feel like the brain, their thinking is all over the place, right? Like they can't really think. And the hardest part about anxiety and, how it shows up is that it's different for everybody. Like no two people experience it in the same way. And the crazy thing also is that we experience anxiety differently for different things. Like I may get nervous and experience nerves going out to play differently than if I'm going to go public speak, right? And another layer, right, is like through my lifetime, it can change. Just because I experience anxiety and feel it some way right here, right now in 2023 doesn't mean it's going to be the same in 2030, So I think his name is Judson Brewer. Great. He's an anxiety researcher, but he coined it a shapeshifter. And I think it's a phenomenal term for it because anxiety is a shapeshifter. And so that inherently for an athlete it can make it really difficult to actually feel anxiety. And I think it also contributes, like, this is why anxiety and like ADD and ADHD are often like they're either cross-diagnosed or misdiagnosed, right? Because there can be some parallels between those two. So an athlete, right? And I really when I'm working with an athlete individually, I like to get them to think about it as an exploration. Like think about it as you're kind of like a little scientist, right? And you're going to kind of get your magnifying glass out, and over like the course of like 2 to 3 weeks, right? You're just going to get really curious and investigate like how you experience anxiety, right? And when it comes up. And I have them kind of track it, whether they do that on their phone, whether they do that written, doesn't really matter, right? But like really like getting curious about like, oh, okay, I'm noticing like, oh, I had a test and I got really really sweaty, palms got really, right? Like tracking it. And then after like 2 to 3 weeks, I'll sit down with an athlete and say, okay, so now we can start to really map and use this information, right? It's just data to now help you start to navigate it more efficiently. And that process is something that's, really individualized, very tailored. I can spend weeks, months working with an athlete on that. But that's, how does that answer kind of what we're going for?
So far, so good. I got so many questions. Versus a quick one is it's more of a definition. Is anxiety and nervousness, are those synonyms or are they different?
Yeah, it's synonyms. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're talking about anxiety, like, and someone thinks, well, I don't have anxiety, I have pregame nerves. That's kind of like what we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So let me say something really quick about that. I think it's, I was just doing a coaching education thing a couple of weeks ago, and we have to remember that all of these things, mental health wise, right? Emotions occur on a spectrum, right? So think about it as like an anxiety spectrum, right?
Okay.
Like everybody has one, right? And the kind of the end, right? The highest point on the anxiety spectrum is going to be like a panic attack. Okay. Like that is
Okay. Right.
full blown, like through the roof, right? But yeah, then there's just, what I consider as like low grade nerves, right? Which again,
Yeah.
not bad, right? So everything occurs on a spectrum. But yeah, you're
Okay.
you're right.
Got it. And earlier you talked about, this idea of like a parent or a coach sort of devaluing the idea of being nervous. Like, no, don't be nervous, which, yeah, I love it. What should they say? What would you say, if someone comes up to you and says, "Hey coach, I'm a little nervous."
Oh, I love this. I just posted 4 responses to help a loved one, right, with mental health. So, and I think some of those can be used here, right? So the first thing, right, and I think this is really good information for parents, friends, teammates in general, yeah, but parents specifically, and I get this from parents a lot, right? So the first thing that we want to do is validate. Okay, validation is the cornerstone, is the foundation of mental health. Okay, because think about it this way: we cannot move through emotion or navigate emotion if we don't feel valid in it, right? If we don't actually accept and acknowledge that this is how we feel, right? It seems really counterintuitive, but I'll explain why, right? If your kid, your child, right, is really anxious and they come up and they say, "Hey, I'm really nervous." And again, right, we're going back to kind of what I was talking about earlier, and you say, "Don't be nervous," right? Now, right, there's a conflict, right? So they're being told, they're being invalidated, right? Like
All right.
that's not, don't have that experience. Basically, they're being told, don't have that experience, right? But this is my experience. So
Mm.
there's automatic friction that doesn't actually then enable them to move through what they're feeling. Okay. Whereas if we go back to the same situation, right? And the kid says, "I'm really nervous right now." And you as a parent just say, "Okay, I hear you. You're really nervous right now." That kid right away is like, "Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's how I feel," right? They're validated. Therefore, right? Then we can say, "Okay, how can I help you?" So let's talk about validation and ways to do that from kind of like a parent, teammate, coach perspective, right?
Yeah.
One of my favorites is just like, "I hear you." Even
Mm.
as a therapist, like I say that with my clients a lot. Like, "Yeah, I hear you." Because that shows them right away that I am actually actively listening to what they're going through, right? You can simply reflect, right? So if the kid comes and says, "I'm nervous," okay, you just say back, "Okay, you're nervous." Validation, okay? You can also say, all right, "Okay, totally. I understand, right, that you are nervous," right? Because honestly, every human experiences anxiety, right? We
Hmm.
in a literal sense, parent may not understand, right, what it's like to be in a cage, right, in a goal and catch shots, right? But they understand being nervous, right? So they could say, I understand what feeling nervous is like, right? You could also and I think it's perfectly okay to also say, like, "You know what? I don't actually fully know how you feel, but you know what? I'm going to acknowledge and I'm going to be here with you." Right? I think
Mm.
one of the things that I alluded to in the post that I just put out, right, which is this whole thing about responses. I think quite often in our responses to our athletes about anxiety, it's about trying to give a response or kind of a solution. And that's not always needed, right? Because the reality is very rarely can we actually solve their anxiety. But what we can provide is presence, right? We can
Mm.
provide, right, being a person that genuinely cares and can sit across from our athlete or our child and say, "You know what? I'm here. I can't fully make your anxiety go away, but you know what? I'll sit with you." And sometimes that alone, right, helps an athlete just start to calm down a little bit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or, right, understand that, hey, I've got someone sitting next to me while I'm anxious, right? Two things. So, like, and I think this is another thing that, we need to acknowledge, right? Like, um, being anxious, right, and going out and performing, they're not mutually exclusive, right? So an athlete actually can be nervous, right, and show up and play. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, we
Right.
don't have to get rid of the anxiety or the nerves for that person to go out and play well, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes it's just understanding that, like, hey, okay, you know what? I'm going to sit here with you for a couple minutes, right? And I'm just going to be with you. And so I think that is like, can we, and I think this is just like a really foundational skill in general in responding, is like, can we put our objective to respond and solve aside and just acknowledge that this is where our athlete is? And a lot of times what I find is that the athlete can then, right, once they're validated, figure it out themselves,
Mm,
or at least, right, like the charge on that anxiety nerves comes down a little bit. And
yeah.
that can be a really profound thing.
Yeah. I love it. That's awesome. And that's probably really good advice for the lacrosse goalie dads out there. Cause I think men more in particular are always like, I hear a problem, I'm going to solve it. Right.
Yeah,
um,
that's a natural human thing, right?
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so natural.
Right.
But the reality of them actually solving it, pretty slim. So
Yeah.
just how can you show up? How can you let them know that you're actually listening to what they're saying, right? And just kind of be with them.
Yeah. So it sounds like, if they're dealing with pregame anxiety or even just the stress of being a goalie, there's a spectrum. It's very unique to the individual, but it sounds like if there's one takeaway they could get from this right now, like start, I guess, like writing it down and really like get observing and really notice like, when does that stress come up and when does it feel like, cause that's sort of step one is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, it is, right? And the whole, like, this is what mindfulness work is about, right? This is why it's a practice. This is why this is something that we train, right?
Yeah.
Because again, I always say this, right? If you're waiting until game time to think about this stuff, like, it's too late.
Right.
You
Right.
really, it needs to be a more proactive approach, right? In order to actually be making a dent. So yeah, you're spot on. And mindfulness, right? This skill, right? This ability to be mindful helps us do that.
Cool. I wanted to in the questions that I sent you, the things that were on my mind. I wanted to talk a little bit about building a goalie's confidence. And before we hit
Yeah.
record, I was like, I know you do mindfulness, right? And I
Mhm.
asked about confidence. Are those two even like related? And you're like, yeah, they 100% are. So talk to me a little bit about how, some tips that we could use to build a lacrosse goalie's confidence.
Yeah. So I mean, I love talking about this. And I'm pretty like, look, I have no formal sports psych training. Obviously, like, I grew up with a dad that was my world, but I didn't go to school for that. I don't
Right.
ever sell that I'm a sports psych, although that's often what people think I am. And I think part of that is just like understanding that, like, well, there's this realm of like, I think mental health, right? Mental performance. And there's a lot of ways to get at that. And I really encourage athletes to like find what resonates with them. Um, yes, mindfulness and confidence are absolutely related. I think, why is that? Well, because at a very foundational level, mindfulness is allowing us to gain more insight and awareness to ourselves, who we are, right? How we think, how we feel, how we behave, how we show up to the world. And right, confidence is absolutely about all of that, right?
Yeah.
And it's potentially a result of that. I think the first thing that, and I take maybe a different approach on this, but like, I think we need to remember that confidence is not a destination. I think too often it's talked about as, oh, well, you need to just be more confident, as like that's kind of like a state that we just land at, right? And then we get there and we stay there. Confidence is ever changing, right? Because confidence is a how we feel about ourselves and in many aspects, right? But that is going to be a result of what's happening in your life. There, you don't have any 2 days that are the same. Life is always changing, sport is
Mm,
always changing, right?
yeah.
And so confidence is something that is going to ebb and flow. I don't sell it as like, and really in a lot of the training I do, like, I don't talk about confidence a lot. because it's going to come and go. And I use myself as an example, and maybe it's because I've never really resonated with confidence. Like, I don't actually think I'm a very confident person at all. I think I've always struggled with confidence. What I think I have done a really good job of is knowing myself, and knowing myself on a very intimate level that allows me to really continue an inner process, right, of understanding my thinking, my feeling, and how I'm showing up to the world. And that in itself, right, gives me an awareness and insight, right? So that, whatever I do, whether it's a presentation, whether it's coming on a podcast, right? Like, if I just know myself really well, right, and I know how to show up, right, and actually just efficiently do my job, right, then confidence will come. But I also think confidence can be, it can come and go for people very, very easily. And so I much more gravitate towards like self-worth, right? I do a lot of what's called self-compassion work, which is kind of like a byproduct of mindfulness. So self-compassion is really a way that we relate to ourselves. In short, right? It's basically treating ourselves like we treat the loved ones in our lives, right?
Yeah.
For many of us and many of the athletes I work with, they have no problem showing up to their loved ones with kindness and compassion and grace, right, when they're in a hard time or they hit a rough spot. But we do the complete opposite for ourselves, right? So it's kind of flipping the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you, around. So do unto yourself as you treat the people you love around you. And I more so like want an athlete, and there's so much cool research about self-compassion and confidence, self-worth, all the above. I really go more towards the self-worth, right? The self-compassion as opposed to confidence. But I think because I think confidence is going to be a byproduct, right, of just knowing yourself really, really well, and really committing to that inner process of really understanding that, like, every single day you're getting new experiences, right? And you're responding and you're needing to think and feel and behave, and you're going to change and evolve, right? And some days we take a step forward and some days we take a step backwards, right? That's kind of what it means to be human. And so, yeah, I mean, we can kind of riff off that, but yes, do I think confidence and mindfulness are related? 1000%.
Interesting. Yeah. The self-compassion thing is, I like that quite a bit. And it's something I've talked about with other goalies. It's like, if you said some of the things that you say to yourself to other people, you wouldn't have any friends. Like, you know what I mean? Like, cause you tell yourself in your own head, like, God, I suck. Man, I'm a horrible goalie. You would never, ever say that to an attacker or defender. Like, you suck. You're a horrible defender. You're a horrible teammate. Right. And so you really have to watch that talk track that goes on in your head. And that's kind of what you were getting at with the self-compassion piece, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I love that. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, let's move on. The other one I wanted to chat about is, there's this feeling that's pretty prevalent, with goalies, in terms of they feel like they're letting the team down. A lot of it goes back to that, those things that we talked about earlier, which is my mistakes are on the scoreboard. If I don't step up, right, our team's not going to win, and they bear the weight of the entire loss on them, right? So how can is there a way I can use mindfulness to sort of deal with that feeling, with that emotion?
Absolutely, right?
Okay.
So if we get back to I think so like feeling like when you let down the team, right? There's probably, and if we look at emotions, and with a lot of either my clients or my athletes, I just have them pull up an emotion wheel, which is basically like this idea that, okay, we have kind of 6 or 7, like what we call primary emotions, right? Couple examples of primary emotions: mad, sad, fear, right? If we take fear, right, anxiety is a subset, right? It's a flavor of fear. So emotions are really complex. There's tons of them, right? And so, I think the first thing is that we, again, kind of like what I said with the response for parents, right? validation is the foundation of mental health. And I think when we are talking about this concept of like, I feel like I've let the team down, like, well, there's emotion underneath that, right? That's a valid experience. And again, right, I'm sure that every single goalie, right, if they were to go to a teammate or right, they could be getting responses like, don't worry about that, right? Don't think that, right? It's not all on you, right? Well, that's how they feel, right? And so being able to use a skill, right, that allows us to get at the feelings that we're having is really important. And two, being able to, what I would tell goalies, right, is to really, I'll use the word honor. I really honor the feeling. That's a real feeling, that is genuinely how you feel in the moment. And it's a valid experience, right? And then, right, once we kind of honor the feeling, right, we then start to navigate. And navigating emotion, I mean, there's hundreds of ways to do this, right? I'll give you what I think could be a couple helpful ones for goalie. One, right, is I think the first piece, right, is like, if you're going to seek guidance, go talk to people, right? Which is often what we do, right? When we're feeling down, be really wise about who you're going to, right? Keeping in mind that validation piece, right? Like going to people that will be able to validate you and support you in this moment, right? Which is you genuinely feel like you've let the team down, right? So going to people that will support you, will help you, have your back, right? And having conversation about it. We know that talking about, right, our experience can be really helpful. Connection, right? Talking with people, right? Connecting with people is also, I mean, absolutely critical for mental health, right? And navigating emotion and just our mental well-being, right? So that's number one, right? Be aware of who you're going to in these moments, okay? Two, right? Then we find ways that help us kind of one, honor the feeling, but also gain space from it. And here's what I mean by that, right? A lot of times when we are feeling down, we sit in it, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm really not, like, we are very quick in our society to be like, oh, if you're feeling bad, get through it, right? Get to the other side of it. Think about things you're grateful for, be positive, right? Turn it around. And there's actually a ton of research in science that shows that actually being able to sometimes sit in pain and suffering and hard feelings is actually really helpful for navigating them. Okay. So there's this piece that, like, I want goalies to understand that, like, it's okay to feel sad and to feel down. That's not wrong. It's not bad. Okay. Right. Every feeling is valid. Now, you also need to be able to kind of almost what I call tap in and out of that, right? So let's say, let's use an example here, right? It's championship time, right? It's we're in tournament time, okay? So let's say you get to the conference championship, right? And you end up losing, right? And you feel like, okay, I've let the team down, right? Maybe you're a senior, right? This is your last chance, and you're genuinely sad. Like, you're really in it. Okay. So what I would say if I was working with a goalkeeper is like, it's okay. That's normal. Right. Like, I'm sure you are really sad. Right. Yeah. If roles were reversed and I was there, I would be really sad too. And I want you to know that it's okay to be sad and to feel how you're feeling. Right. Again, validation. Right. So it is okay for a goalkeeper to be there for a little bit. And, right, we need to also be giving the goalkeeper needs to be thinking about, well, how can I also, like, shift in and out of this, right? How can I give myself break or relief from this feeling? Distract yourself. Go do things, right? Go, okay, so season's over, right? Go get involved in something else, right? Go, get back on the field, right? Do whatever. So there's a lot of different ways. And this is where, like, again, the individual gets to kind of get creative with it. Like, what helps them kind of, okay, take your mind off of it, right? Get your body out of that feeling for a little bit, right? And then it's okay to return to it, right? And so with tough emotion, we need to understand that it's not like, navigating is not this one and done. We move through emotions, we come in and out of them. Okay. So really allowing yourself to find ways that give you that relief. Another one is, that I really want to highlight is like understanding, like there's potentially a time for the kind of sitting in your feelings. And then there's a time where what can be really helpful is actually like reconnecting with joy, reconnecting with fun.
Yeah.
And that does not have to be sport related. And this gets into, you asked another question about, I think just like navigating stress, but also what if you're not motivated?
Yeah.
There's a lot of cool research about, one, motivation, creativity, right? And reconnecting with joy, things that actually like that quintessential phrase of like things that light your soul on fire, right? And it does not have to be sport related. Okay. So like I have an athlete that is like a amazing artist. Okay. And they were kind of in this, unmotivated, almost burnout phase. Right. And it was like, okay, put sport aside and go paint.
Yeah.
Right. And so for an hour each day, go paint. And so that they're connecting, tapping into something that like really nourishes, and it's going to sound silly, but like really nourishes their soul. Right. And like gets them feeling good and joyful, right? That can be a really helpful thing for also when, a goalie is really feeling like they let the team down, right? Like how can you connect with like these pockets of joy, things that kind of lift your spirit, right? And then understanding like the last thing about this, right, is that you can move back and forth between two things, right? You can go on with your day and get back to class, right? And get back on the field, and right, you can still teeter and totter with this feeling that like, dang, I'm still really bummed about this, right? And I think the more that an athlete can do that, right, they then day by day, week by week can move through that, right? And what I would also say is like, we went off that one example, right?
Right.
This obviously like, goalkeepers that need to turn around and play in 2 days, right? That's kind of a little bit of a different story and might take some more nuanced, individualized approach. But I think kind of the example I gave paints a picture that like, look, emotions are complex, right? And the more that A, we honor them, right? And then B, kind of find ways to honor them, but then also gain relief from them can really help an athlete.
Great answer. You're great at what you do. We're getting a free little therapy session here. It's amazing.
Well, I love it. So,
Yeah, it shows. The one that resonated with me the most, and I've heard a lot of goalies do this and say this, is that, communicating that with like a trusted person. And
Yeah.
for a lot of them, it's a teammate. And I
Mhm.
remember I was chatting with one of my sponsored goalies, and she said like she felt really bad because she let in a goal at the end. They lost in the semifinals of the national championship. And the team was doing like a sort of a recap the next season. And she was like talking about that and how she felt so bad for the team. And everyone was like, and how she let the team down. And everyone's like, no, you didn't let the team down, right? Like they didn't feel like that. They didn't feel like she had let the team down. She was sort of feeling like that in her own head, but just because she was able to express that with her teammates, then like, cleared the air.
Yeah.
So I like that one quite a bit.
No, I think it's the other thing I'll say that just came to mind, honestly, like and this is a little bit more of like comes back to that, like, okay, we'll say you lose on a Friday night, you're having this feeling and you got to play on Sunday. Like the other thing that I give to my athletes a lot is like reconnect with literally just the basics, right? The basics
Yeah.
that actually allow you as an athlete, as a goalkeeper to feel most grounded, right? And for a lot of athletes, right, it's just going to be basic nutrition, basic sleep, right? Basic recovery stuff. Like what are all the things, right? Performance related that allow you to feel baseline at your best, right? Because if you just do those basics, the little things, right? Then even if you're still feeling like you let the team down and you're sad, right? At least you're putting yourself in a position, you're preparing your mind body system, right? In a place to show up on Sunday and compete, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. Love it. Love it. This is awesome. I think we kind of touched on this one throughout, but mental health is a big thing, right? Big issue. We talked about how like it's at an all-time high in terms of the problem, but perhaps an all-time low in terms of the solutions.
Yeah.
We hit on some issues. I mean, the main one I'm taking away here is that validation. Validation is a huge element of the mental health, right? Telling someone that, no, like, don't be nervous, or don't be that way, or, you know, sort of invalidating their experience, their feeling, is really hard, because then they got the feeling and now they feel bad about it as well. Right. So,
Yep.
but anyway, so if we talk about mental health, are there some other things we should know in terms of just supporting a goalie's mental health as a parent, as a coach, as a teammate?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, 100%. Right. So yeah, I love how you you recap the navigate. I mean, sure, the validation piece, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll come back to this. It really is like the foundation of mental health, right? So yes, right. And that's, I mean, I say that, right? And that's not easy, right? It's not easy personally. Like, athletes need to understand that that's actually a skill, right? That we have to learn and develop for ourselves, because we also cannot be seeking validation of our feelings from other people, right? We need to be able to validate our own feelings. But then, yes, from the parent perspective, right? Validation. I also think that something that's coming up a lot for with parents, and coaches kind of ask this as well at times. Like, I think the thing we need to remember, and my background's in clinical social work, and something that throughout my master's program was really an emphasis on, like, an individual knows themselves the best.
Mm-hmm.
Even as a therapist, right? Like, working with a client, I do not know my client more than my client knows my client, right? Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
I will never, and I rarely give actual, like, advice, right? Because I really do believe that, like, even kids, right? Even kids, even adolescents, even college players, right? I really do genuinely believe that, like, they know themselves, right? And I think often, again, I'm not a parent yet, so I don't want to, be assuming things, but even as coaches, and even at times, like, as mental performance coaches or therapists, like, there is this kind of, like, almost power dynamic, which is that, like, oh, I have the information, right? Or I have the wisdom, or I have the age difference on you, right? So I know what you should be doing, right?
Right.
And that's just not always the case, right? And so I think the message we need to really remember is that, like, do more listening, right, than telling. Listening can be such a profound thing. I do a lot, like, in mindful communication as well, because we just, as humans, we don't listen well. And so you asked a question about, like, okay, what happens when goalkeeper didn't have a great game and they get in the car, and what do parents say, right? Say nothing. Stop talking. It would be my advice, right? Like, again, I'm not a parent, so I don't want to sit here and, like, say again that I know, right? I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying that in general, right? We don't listen well. And so, are there elements, right, where as a parent we can be doing more listening than talking, right? Engaging our athletes in conversation, asking them questions. I really do, and I found this in most, whether they're high school athletes or they're even college athletes. Like, if you meet them where they are, they will come to you when they're ready about really anything. Okay.
Yeah.
So again, if we show, right, in whatever role you are, coach, therapist, parent, right? If we show, again, kind of gets back to that presence and validation piece, right? If we show, right, that we are here, we are present, we are actually listening with them, more often than not, right, the athlete is going to get to a place where they will open their mouths and come to us when they are ready. I think that's a really big piece of the puzzle, right, when navigating mental health. We talked about validation. I mentioned the listening. I mentioned not assuming that we know, right, what our athletes need. So therefore, right, like, a lot of times, and I'll say, like, this is one of the, honestly, like, even in my own mental health journey, like, one of the best responses I've ever gotten is, like, what do you need from me? right? Like if I'm especially like, you know, in the height of my my panic, right? Like living panic attack to panic attack. It was my sister and my mom, right? That finally they were like, they dropped the need to solve, right? To like make the panic and anxiety go away. And they just point blank asked, like, what do you need from me?
Yeah.
And, you know, I'll be honest, like at times I didn't know, right? And it's okay for them to not know, right? And then again, just get back to this, like, okay, I'm just here, right? I'm just going to be here. I'm just going to sit with you. And if you find out what you need, then I'll be here and you can tell me, right? If not, then I'm just going to sit here. I mean, there's
Love
so
it.
we
Love
could
it.
talk
No, that's
freaking days,
I
right?
know.
But
I know.
trying to
I
give
was just
some
thinking that in my head, we could probably do a Joe Rogan style 3-hour podcast on this. But
yeah.
I do like to keep them at the hour. I got so much notes here. Thank you so much, Emily, for sharing all that info.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about where people can find you.
Yeah. So, I should have this answer dialed in. So let me think. Website is Perrin Wellness and Performance. That's my company. I am on Instagram, pretty active there. Put a lot of stuff out, a lot of content. Emily Perrin LMSW. I am on Twitter, Emily L Perrin. And I have a YouTube channel, which is just, I'm pretty positive it's just my name, Emily Perrin, YouTube. And so there you can find some longer practices, whether it's breath work, whether it's movement-based meditations. And that is it. I'm in Baltimore, but I will say I haven't spent a lot of time there in the year of 2023 because I've been on the road, but that's where I'm based.
Love it. Well, Emily, thank you so much. I guess if you had to leave the goalies out there with the final piece of advice, what would that be?
Oh man, I think what I would say is like, you know, kudos to you guys. Like there's a lot of players, right? That like, there's a reason they don't choose being a goalkeeper, right? It's hard. And I really want to, I think, acknowledge, that it's hard. And I want you to also, you know, again, I think it's going to get back to this validation piece, which is like so much of your emotional, mental experience is really valid. It makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of goalkeepers that may go through things. There's a lot of athletes, people, players, right, that go through things, right? And then they think they're not normal, right? Or they think they're weird or they're not dealing with it right. And I think what I'll say is like, I just want to validate probably every emotional high, low that you've had, right, is probably pretty spot on, you know? And right, there's a lot of people in the world doing what I'm doing. There's a lot of tools and skills that can help you, right? Just dial some of that in, so that, you know, you're not only performing better as a goalkeeper, but you're just getting a little bit more efficient, right? Happier, healthier as a human being.
Love it. Emily, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.